everyone. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 16th of July, 2025. I am Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. We have to talk about the ongoing fallout from the lack of disclosure of the Epstein files, which continues to this day and doesn't seem to be slowing down, thanks to what the president has been saying about it. So we have to talk about that because truly it's shocking. And also there's enormous fallout. And I still continue to think that this has legs, despite some of the very bizarre about faces that have happened in the brosphere, Trumpian media ecosphere. A bunch of other things to talk about today, so I'm very glad you're here. If you are new here, I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I was a Wall Street lawyer and a human rights lawyer for 15 years. And in the last 15 years, I've been working as a political consultant on everything from U.S. Senate campaigns all the way down to very small mobilizations. And I work on the regular with people who are here to make a big impact for change, even in these incredibly trying times. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to hit subscribe, thumbs up, and comment. Okay. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a black mock turtleneck shirt, sleeveless. My hair is pulled back. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and I'm in my office in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart as usual. And I'm coming to you from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. All right, so here's the latest on what's happening with the Epstein files, just to catch everybody up. There is tremendous ongoing fallout about this happening in the MAGA universe, in part because it's very clear that the base is not letting go of this. We saw an about face yesterday with a number of podcasters, including people like Charlie Kirk, who all of a sudden out of nowhere were like, I'm going to trust the president. Clearly, the high-level MAGA influencers have gotten the marching orders that they should shut up about the Epstein files. Trump himself, however, has taken to Truth Social to essentially attack his own base about this. And again, this is something that I don't think is going to land at all well. This has happened in the last hour or so. It's really bad and also really odd. And for those of you who have been here for a long window of time, you know that we spent like all the way back into 2017, we were talking about things like extinction bursts and what happens when sociopathic narcissists are called to account for their own behavior. And what we are witnessing right now is a prime example of that. So here's what happened this morning on Truth Social. He wrote an absolute screed comparing this whole thing about the Epstein files to his claims about the Russia hoax and that it's Obama and Comey and Clinton and all this other nonsense, which we all know is impossibly not true. Let's not forget that Jeffrey Epstein died in prison in 2019. Who was the president in 2019? Donald Trump. Just in the same way that the prosecution of Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Epstein's primary accomplice, resulted in her going to prison for 20 years for sex trafficking. It's not like nothing happened here, right? It's not like the whole thing was fabricated. There are like dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens of teenage victims who have come forward, okay? So this is not something that was invented. This is not something that has no legs. And I'm just going to remind everybody that we know already from the flight manifests that Donald Trump was on Epstein's plane, dubbed the Lolita Express, at least 7 times. There's photographs, like at least a dozen photographs of him and Maxwell and Epstein. So this isn't going away. And Epstein described himself in his final days as Donald Trump's best friend. Donald Trump gave interviews saying that he had known Jeffrey for Epstein for 15 years and they got along great and he was a great guy and they both like beautiful women on the younger side. Like, we all know that there's something here, right? So Trump backed into a corner about this, in part by recent polling. Let's take a pause here because I want you guys to know what this polling is about. YouGov, which of course is one of the few polling sites that generally, in my opinion, has at least frequently reliable polling methodology. We talked about this so much during the 2024 election, but YouGov is a pretty reliable polling company. They did a poll yesterday that showed that, get this, all of America is unified that the Epstein files should be released. It's like 80% of Democrats, 75% of Republicans, 79 or something like that % of independents all think it should be released. Only 4% of the public thinks that the Epstein files should stay where they are. So this is an absolutely losing issue for Donald Trump. And in the face of this, this is what he did. He called his base weaklings and said that if that's how the perspective they have on this, he doesn't want their support anymore. Whew. I mean, talk about self-sabotage. Talk about self-immolation. Talk about conduct that is going to make his base of supporters, people who stepped up for him 3 times, who have fallen into the whole QAnon conspiracy theory like we talked about yesterday. You think this is going to land well with them? I think not. And apparently this morning Reddit is blowing up about this because essentially he has gone after the very people who have backed him from the beginning, in part because he was telling them that he was going to drain the swamp and that he was going to get to the bottom of what happened with Epstein and that the Epstein files were going to be released. And it fits into this whole insane conspiracy theory about a global cabal of child molesters running the government, not just this government, but governments all around the world. And that he was going to get to the bottom of that. And now, of course, he's like, Epstein files don't exist. I don't know what anybody's talking about. So let me just make one thing really clear about this, okay? You all know here that I am not a fan of conspiracy theories generally, right? I think, trained as a lawyer, was a trial lawyer for 15 years. I believe in evidence, okay? I'm going to say something here, though, that I think we all need to really consider because we already know that there is documentary evidence, photographic evidence, testimonial evidence that's been admitted in courts about Trump's relationship with Epstein, okay? The only thing that makes any sense in this explanation of what's really going on here is that the implicated people inside the Epstein files include Trump, that it's way worse than what we knew before, and that it also includes people on whom he is reliant. What do I mean by that? I mean like uber wealthy people who we know funded Epstein, funneled money through Epstein, paid for his ability to engage in sex trafficking, and over whom Epstein had an enormous amount of blackmailed material. There are rumors, of course, that there are videotapes. There are rumors that there are audio tapes. We don't know that for sure, okay? But the only logical explanation for why these files would not be released, given all the promises that Trump has made historically, and Bondi being like, the list is on my desk, and that whole influencer scene where they handed out these white binders, you have to laugh at it, sorry, these white binders that were labeled Epstein Files Part 1 to all the MAGA influencers. The only explanation why we would have this about face is that Donald Trump is in those files and it's awful, scathing. And that it probably includes some of his most significant donors. That's the only explanation that makes any sense. And he's going to jive about this. He's going to run around and claim, this is true or this is false or this was created or it was written by these people who he blames for everything. He's going to run around and do the kind of don't believe that the sky is blue kind of nonsense that he does all the time. And that's in fact what he's doing now. The really fascinating thing about this, though, is it's not sticking. So now we have to talk about the deviations from this path that he's chosen, okay? Because Lara Trump, of all people, and I don't think we should buy this for a second. I'm just going to say this with a huge warning alarm over my head, okay? But Lara Trump, of all people, yesterday went on far-right media and said that she expected that there would be a turnaround from this inside the administration, that she believed that we would hear more. And it was a really weird way of her saying it because it was like she didn't have confirmation that they were going to do it, but she was suggesting that it was going to be forthcoming or that it should be, okay? Simultaneously, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, called for the release of these files. Now, that has been contradicted by a vote down last night of an effort by Democrats to get the files released, which 211 Republicans voted against, okay? It was like a resolution, a congressional resolution. But now this morning, we have people like Thomas Massie of the Freedom Coalition inside the House out there calling for the files to be released, introducing a bill that would require the Epstein files to be released. Now, he needs a handful of Republicans to join him on this because Democrats are going to vote for it. But the fracturing inside the MAGA coalition is ongoing and very real. And the only reason why he would be lashing out against his own base is because he knows he's cornered and trapped. There's no easy way out of this one. Like, this is a scenario of his own invention, right? And the chickens are coming home to roost. So I am going to be very interested to see how this unfolds over the next 24 hours. Now, we have some folks inside the Patreon community who were like, how do we know that what's eventually released is going to be real? Okay, so this is the moment where I have to remind you all that documentary evidence these days isn't really documents, okay? Maybe originally documents, maybe we're in paper format at some point, but the way that evidence is, I don't know, saved, shared, conveyed, filed in court is electronically, okay? And there are metadata imprints on documents. They can technically be hidden in certain ways, but you learn about this when you're a litigator. There are metadata imprints on documents that can show if they've been doctored, okay? So the likelihood here that like we're magically going to see a document that absolves Trump of anything having to do with Epstein, first of all, it would be a very much don't believe your eyes and ears moment, because we've already seen all the photographs, right? We already know that like Trump's name and his butler's name and Melania's name and all of their phone numbers are in Epstein's phone book, right? I don't see any way in which they're going to be able to manipulate material to get their way out of this, because it's going to be discovered. Like, it's much harder these days than people would imagine to hide the fact that you have doctored material. There's, technology that can determine that. So I think everybody who, at this point is worried about this, we have a prime example of this in recent days. So I have to give a little bit of a warning about this whole thing about the doctored footage outside of Epstein's cell. So one of the things that people need to understand is that tape is not actually outside of Epstein's cell, all right? It's actually of like the guard station near where he was being housed. And so there are debates about whether or not, if that footage was doctored, it actually even means anything. But the DOJ released that footage claiming that it was raw, meaning that it had not been modified in any way. And what was found by people who do this sort of thing is that in fact it had been edited in an Adobe video editing suite. Like, they could see that in the metadata, and that about 2 minutes of the footage is just flat missing, gone. Now, again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and there could be a completely legitimate reason for this. I can't really imagine what it would be at this point. Who knows? All right. And I happen to believe that Epstein did in fact commit suicide. I don't believe that he was murdered, like full stop. Let me just say that. All right. But is it weird that the DOJ would release footage of the guard post near his cell, claiming it was raw and undoctored, only to have it immediately discovered that 2 minutes of the footage is missing? Yes, that's very weird. Like, if I was a lawyer involved in this case from some perspective, right, I would be asking about that at depositions. I would be asking witnesses about that on the stand. I would want to get to the bottom of who had access to that video footage and who modified it and for what purpose and what was missing. And if it's a nothing burger, fine, but you want to know why, right? You would want to know why, because that smells bad. Just in the same way that the refusal to release the unredacted files smells like a cover-up, right? And lawyers can be wrong about this. Like, let me just say this. We all know, I mean, any trial lawyer who's worth their weight knows that sometimes you have a hunch about something, and when you get into depositions or you get witnesses on the witness stand, it turns out that your hunch isn't maybe quite right. But it's still a hunch, and you're going to follow up to find out what's at the bottom of that. That's exactly how I feel about this situation, right? Again, I don't believe Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, but I want to know why there's 2 minutes missing from that footage. It's weird. There is a legitimate explanation for it somewhere. What is it? Just in the same way that I want to know what's in the unredacted Epstein files that has caused them now to pretend that those files don't even exist. Like, weeks after Pam Bondi was like, got the list on my desk. So these are things that, we need to be looking into. And obviously, we're going to see what the rest of MAGA does with this. Meanwhile, yesterday, Mike Johnson was out there claiming that, Trump was saved from assassination by God. Let's forget about the firefighter who was murdered in front of his family right next to him. Wonder what God had to say about that. But nonetheless, he's now called for the release of the files, and we're going to have to see how this all plays out. Okay, we did have one other question on the Patreon feed. Reminder, if you're new here, you should go subscribe to our feed over on Patreon at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $5 a month. That's less than 20 cents a broadcast. You get to ask me questions in advance of every single broadcast and also get access to bonus broadcasts that we run every week. So go check that out if you want more of what we do here. Somebody asked me a question on the Patreon feed this morning about Maxwell and why aren't Republicans or anybody else going to Maxwell to ask her what she knows about Donald Trump? Okay, first things first about this that I think people have missed in this entire discourse, okay? Trump can pardon Ghislaine Maxwell. She was convicted of federal sex trafficking crimes. It's a federal charge. He can pardon her anytime he wants, and she can just walk away scot-free. I don't think anybody wants to rustle those feathers, and honestly, I think if he did it, it would be an incredible break point for anybody who remains on the fence at this moment about Donald Trump. But nonetheless, I don't think anybody wants to actually talk to Maxwell. Let's not forget the fact that, she went on the lam. She has not publicly spoken about anything having to do with Epstein in any way, shape, or form. And we have no indication that she would even tell the truth if anybody asked her anything, right? So the idea that somehow Maxwell has this information that isn't already available in the investigatory files of the FBI and the DOJ, I think it's a fool's errand, okay? I don't think Maxwell has anything really to contribute to this because I don't think she's reliable and I don't think she's going to tell the truth. In fact, there's a stronger likelihood that she wouldn't tell the truth because she would be angling for a pardon. So I think we have to kind of abandon that theory, okay? But I do think that it is very important at this point that we consider continuing to demand, and the Democrats thankfully have been really good at this. We've seen Jamie Raskin out there about this. We've seen lots of other folks actually on the Hill calling for the release of these files. The Democrats have taken this one and run with it, which is great. We need to continue doing the thing of asking. And I'm going to remind everybody, Emil Bove is apparently going to get a vote in the Senate tomorrow for his nomination to the Third Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. That is a lifetime seat on the bench, okay? Again, if you have a MAGA senator, you should be because just a reminder, Emil Bove is currently second or third in charge of the DOJ. If you have a MAGA senator, you should be calling that senator and demanding that they find out whether or not Emil Bove has taken any role in keeping the Epstein files from the public. And I frankly don't think it matters, whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. You should ask, have you found out whether or not Emil Bove had anything to do with this cover-up? Because you're outraged about it. Where are the Epstein files? And, he's been in the DOJ. Why isn't he telling everybody that they should be released? He shouldn't be on the federal bench if he's part of a cover-up. There's nothing wrong with saying anything like that. It's also legitimately true. But let me just say one other thing here. There's no way that man should get that appointment. 75 former federal judges have signed a letter that has now been sent to the Senate saying that he is not qualified to serve because of everything that he did in relation to January 6th, because of everything that he did in relation to the Eric Adams investigation, because of the fact that he ordered DOJ attorneys to ignore federal court rulings concerning CCOT and deportations. I mean, the dude is a really bad guy, and anything that we can do to influence him not succeeding on this vote, we have to do. So make your phone calls about that, please. All right. All right. So long story short, the Epstein scandal has legs, and everybody should be doing their part to amplify it, keep it in the forefront of the public mind. Even people like Chris Hayes this morning who were like, I wasn't really sure whether or not Trump was in these files, but with the way they're acting, I kind of think he might be. And I happen to just think, I've thought for quite some time that he was all over this. I mean, we have every indication that he is. Okay. So we had this ruling from the Supreme Court on the shadow docket that on Monday that was, really bad. That's the understatement of the year, because essentially what it allowed was for Trump to gut the Department of Education, fire thousands of federal workers while a case against the executive order that did it proceeds through the court. There were dissents. The 3 liberal justices dissented, and the dissent was scathing, scathing. I mean, this is how they have been lately, no question. But this particular dissent basically raised all these flags that, the majority was enabling the absolute destruction of the federal government, ruining the constitutional principles of separation of powers, destroying the judiciary's capacity to be a check on the presidency. It's all true. It's all true. And, the thing I want everybody to understand is that because this is a shadow docket ruling, meaning it's not a part of, I really don't like that term. Those of you who've been here for a while know this. It's sort of like a pejorative term. But, the Supreme Court, even when they're not in term, will rule on emergency petitions, right? Like if somebody's set to be executed in a state that still has the death penalty, they will review that even when they're technically on vacation for the summer, okay? Or out of the office for the summer. Because reminder, the Supreme Court term runs from October to June, end of June, all right? So that's how it gets in front of them, all right? But the shadow docket is a way in which they can rule on these kind of emergency petitions. And there's not a requirement for there to be any sort of majority opinion about why they're ruling the way that they're ruling, okay? So we don't have any rationale behind this decision. The 6 conservative justices were just like, yeah, sure, let him fire these people. Who cares? That's the decision that they've made. And the liberals are raising enormous alarm bells about the consequences of this. Because here's the thing. Even as this case proceeds through the courts, where employees of the Department of Education are going to challenge the executive order, which, by the way, is clearly unlawful. Can I just say this? Totally illegal to do what Trump has done. There's literally no debate about it, okay? They let him do it anyway. Very troubling. This Supreme Court is illegitimate, and we have to start talking about it in that way. They are endorsing illegal activity by the President of the United States and the executive branch right now, and that's the truth. That's the truth. That, by the way, is also what the liberal justices are saying in every single one of these dissenting opinions. Okay. All that said, here's the thing. It could go the other way as it works its way through the courts. The employees of the Department of Education could win, but the problem now is that the horse has left the barn because the Supreme Court has said you can fire all of these people, and are we going to get them back? We think those people are going to be just like hanging around for the next 6 to 18 months while this case winds its way through the courts? No. They're going to get other employment. They're going to figure out ways to support their families or themselves. And so the damage, unfortunately, is being done in real time. And the only way around that is expanding the court, which now you understand why so many of us during the Biden administration were like, expand the court, expand the court, expand the court. We need 13 justices, 1 for each circuit, like it's been all through history. So, it's very bad. It's very bad. And frankly, I had a moment when this opinion came out anyway, where I was like, this is generational damage. It's generational damage to the country to destroy the Department of Education, to cut funding. That's a separate thing that happened, which we talked about last week, to cut all this funding immediately that was already due to schools in July. There's a lawsuit pending about that as well. But I mean, schools are floundering over the summer with special education funding and after school funding and the things that they need to make sure that students are getting what they need come August and September when all these kids go back to school, right? So it's an incredible mess. And I don't think we can deny anymore, not that we have been able to do so for a long time, but that the 6 conservative justices on the Supreme Court are all in on enabling fascism. Right? They're all in on the destruction of the standard form of democratic government that our country has been supposed to be about from the beginning. And it sucks. This is one reason why yesterday on Blue Sky, I said, and lawyers, what do we think about, does the law matter now that the Supreme Court says it doesn't in certain circumstances? And how do we handle that? Because these are things that we have to start thinking about now. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. Okay. Final bit of breaking news from this morning that we have to talk about is that there is ongoing reporting this morning, that President Trump is going to fire Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So let me just say one thing about this, because mainstream media is not saying this. It is illegal for a president to fire the chairman of the Fed. Okay. These are 10-year terms that are meant to be independent so that monetary policy in the United States is independent from any political aim. There's very good reasons for this. Right? We do not want our whole economy to rise and fall on the whims of a madman. So apparently the way that this news broke was that Trump drafted a letter firing Jerome Powell and showed it to some Republicans and said, should I do this? Which is illegal. Firing him is illegal. And somebody should be saying you were actually legally you're not allowed to do that. So this raises a very significant breaking point because Jerome Powell doesn't have to accept the firing. And the real question that I think a lot of us are asking this morning, out of concern for what happens to our economy in the event that Trump installs somebody in the Fed to do his bidding, is whether or not Jerome Powell is going to fight back. And he should. I'm just going to say that. He should. He should hang on to the rest of his term. He is legally obligated to stay in that position for 10 years. He cannot be fired by any president for any reason. So again, this is one of those things where we're going to have to wait to see how this all plays out. But I personally am worried. And I hope Jerome Powell has the backbone, which I think he does, because he stood up to kind of a lot of withering abuse from Donald Trump so far in the second term. I just hope he has the backbone to stand up and say, like, no, actually, you can't fire me and I'm not going anywhere. Because that, by the way, would create not just a backstop, but some sense of stability in terms of like the US economy and the value of the dollar and independent monetary theory. All of that really matters, because without it, the US economy is going to kind of like, I mean, I'm not even going to speculate. It's going to be really bad. So, you know, let's just see what happens with this. But that's something that everybody should be aware of, because it's very distressing. All right. 48 hours from now, less than 48 hours from now, our third cohort of the Dual Power Accelerator starts class. Registration for that closes at 9 a.m. ET on Friday morning. The link to register is already below in the show notes here. Please get in on this. We have a great group of people joining us for the third cohort. We've put 250 people through this program already, and we're really super excited to get started with those who have joined us for this round. If you want to learn how to build alternative systems of safety and survival and disruption during this time while we watch all these things crumble, right? Like Medicaid, food supplies, everything else that we're currently like facing down with the tariffs and what's coming. You want to learn how to help people who are potentially under threat for detention. You should get in on this program. Please register if it calls to you. We need everybody trained in how to build dual power where they live. This is really important and significant work. So again, you've got less than 48 hours to get in on that. We have a lot of alums in the chat today who can tell you like what an amazing experience they've had so far in that program. So please consider joining us for that. And also, as always, please subscribe to this channel, give us a thumbs up, like this broadcast, share it with your friends, because lots of people need truthful information through the lens of like progressive activism right now. And also, if you're watching after the fact, drop us a comment, because it tells the algorithm you like what we're doing here. And lastly, I have a mad degree of thanks for our Patreon subscribers and our subscribers here on the channel. Your funding of your subscriptions helps to keep, I don't know, my kids in food, and also helps to pay our staff behind the scenes and makes this work possible. So please become a paid subscriber if you like what we're doing here. All right. Lots of love, all of you. I am not here tomorrow. I'm speaking at a conference in the Hudson Valley on the importance of resilience during this era. Very excited to talk about that and the importance of resilience generally to being able to make change. So I am not broadcasting at all tomorrow, but I will be back on Friday regular time. So I will see you all then. And lots of love to everybody. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you soon. All right, bye.